Welcome to Raising the Flipping Bar, the go-to podcast for aspiring and seasoned real estate investors. I'm your host, Derek Marlin, and I'm the CEO of Elevation. We're a real estate investment company based right here in Denver, Colorado. We'll dive into smart investment strategies, market insights, and essential tips for scaling your real estate ventures. Whether you're making your first investment or your 100th investment, this podcast is your blueprint for success in the ever-evolving world of real estate investing. Get ready to elevate your real estate game and begin your journey with me. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Raising the Flipping Bar. So we're in the middle of 2024 and I've seen a couple great pieces of content. And I think I really want to talk about comparing what was going on in the 1980s to what's going on today. Because not only do I think, I always try to base a lot of my opinions on obviously data, which is super important. And there are so many parallels of what's going on. And so in today's episode, we're going to talk about three key drivers as to, in my opinion, what helps move markets. Okay, I'm going to set the stage for this episode. Picture it, Sicily, 1923. That's a little shout out to my wife, Ann, because she freaking loves the Golden Girls. And I feel like Sophia Petrillo talking about this. But what I really want to do is take you back in all reality to 1989. Ironically, which is a weird full circle, our company mission is to create full circle value. And I feel like this is a full circle moment, is we lived in Denver in the 80s as I was a kid growing up, and I was super into baseball cards. And there's a place that I think sadly just closed, and it was called Bill's Sports Collectibles. And it is literally maybe 2 or 3 minutes up the road from where we're at right now, the Broadway Collective. So it's kind of crazy that I'm in a building that we now own. And our kind of entrepreneurial journey started in the mid 80s when I lived in Denver. I saved up as much of my yard work and lawn mowing money as possible. I remember it. It's funny because I actually don't have the best long-term memory, probably too many hits playing football for a long time, but that's again, another episode. And I remember saving up and rolling all of these coins. For those of our younger generation, there's a thing called cash. There was no Venmo. There was no Zelle. And I rolled up all these coins and I dropped, I think at the time, I really wish I could give you the exact number, but I want to feel like I paid about $40 for a set, which was all the different baseball players within one specific year, for the inaugural set for the Upper Deck brand, and it was 1989. And I remember plopping this huge bag of coins down on the table. At least it was rolled, but the guy was super pissed off that I was buying this thing in not only cash, but more so change. I was so excited because it was Ken Griffey Jr.'s rookie year. And he was, in my opinion, one of the best baseball players of all time. His rookie card was actually one of the most valuable cards at that time. And so again, saved up a ton, was pumped to buy the set. It had the Ken Griffey Jr. card in it. It really brought me back to thinking of what moves markets. And so what we used to do is I'm one of four boys. We would have baseball card shows that my folks would let us host, and we each had friends over and we'd order some pizza. And the funny thing about it is all we would do is we would argue with one another and try to rip off one another. And no trades ever got done because you were always so worried about what did the price guide say something was worth, because it used to be called the Beckett price guide. And you would, take your little baseball card and look up what year and what brand it was, and it gave you a value or whatever. And so nothing ever happened at the Marlin family baseball card shows. But what it taught me is, and I remember this clear as day, is I was in 6th grade and I remember looking up that card's value, and my dad said, something's worth only what someone's willing to pay. I was like, no, Dad, here's the Beckett price guide. It says the Ken Griffey Jr. rookie card is worth like $47. And he's like, something is only worth what someone is willing to pay for it. Again, no, Dad. And he goes, okay, fine, then sell it. Well, I couldn't sell that damn card because it was supply and demand and there were a bunch of cards out there. So to me, it's all about telling you this story about drivers to what moves markets. And we always talk about supply and demand. And that was something that really has stayed with me for a long, long time, is something is only worth what someone is willing to pay for it. So if we talk about, okay, great. Thank you for sharing your 1980 story. I appreciate that. I'm sure that's what you guys are thinking. But let's really talk about three things that are moving markets, in my opinion. And what I'm going to do is talk about two that are probably, more mainstream. I think a lot of you guys are going to say, I'm glad you're bringing this data up, but this is not like a news break, world beater information. But one is pretty under the radar, and we actually got it sent to us by one of our other rockstar agents, Rick Stubblefield. He's a fellow data guy like myself. And so we have a kindred spirit in that. He sent me this podcast, and let's talk about really, I think, the number one under the radar thing, and then we'll jump into the two kind of more mainstream things as to what moves markets. So you'll also want to check out the show notes, because there's a great podcast that I really gleaned a lot of this information from and summarized it with the way that we're seeing things right now in Metro Denver. So there's a really smart investor out there. His name is Ken McElroy. He's got a great podcast. He's got great content. Shout out, Ken. Would love to have you on the show. But he just recorded an episode and he talked about immigration. And again, let's get it right out there. This is not a political podcast. This is a business podcast. This is an entrepreneurship podcast. I'm not talking about immigration, whether you are pro or con from a political standpoint, but it absolutely moves the market, and it's an economic factor that 100% really drives housing prices, in my opinion. And that's what Ken brought up. And I think you're spot on, my friend. And they talked about documented immigration versus undocumented immigration. Depending upon the data source, there is anywhere from a housing shortage of anywhere from 3 to 5 million properties across the United States, because we have more people that need housing than housing is currently available. And from the housing crash of 2008, 9, and 10, builders still have those mental scars and are not overbuilding, in my opinion. There might be a little bit going on in the multifamily space, but as far as single family homes are going right now, they cannot keep up. And again, supply and demand, why would you take that extra risk when you can make a bunch of money and slowly release that supply into the market? They think, or Ken thinks, is that if we think about illegal immigrants coming into the United States, which, let's think back, that's exactly how this company was founded and really brought to greatness, in my opinion. But it could be as high as a 7 to 8 million home shortage in the United States. That is crazy. And so when you looked at their map, again, go back and look at his stuff. He's got really some great charts and some great data. It's not just immigration to California, to Texas, to Florida. Denver actually shows up as one of the higher heat map hit points for immigration. And if you've got more people looking for houses, yes, a lot of people are saying, well, that really just affects the rental market. In tier one, I think it does affect the rental market first, but it also does at some point. People are coming in, they're getting better jobs, they're getting education, they're saving up money, they're combining family generations, and they are buying houses. And so that's helping, I think, drive up our demand and our prices for the Denver housing market. And that data is 100% spot on nationwide. But the cool thing that they talked about is they talked about countries with high immigration rates, both legally and illegally, is the US, Australia, England, and the UK. Their home price appreciation is between 5 and 8% over the last couple of years per year, versus you look at companies with very low immigration like Japan. I thought that was interesting. Their housing appreciation is 0.2%. So you're looking at a bunch of different countries. Again, they can't even track undocumented immigration. But that is 100% helping move the housing market. It's something that I hadn't really heard about. And again, thank you, Rick, for sending it my way. I think this is super spot on. So I think it's bolstering rental rates, and it is then a trickle into housing prices. Whether it's happening, we look at the same cycle that probably happened 3 or 4 years ago, and then those people are slowly starting to buy homes, or it's going to be worse right now. And why do we think home prices, in my opinion, will not crash over the next couple of years? Immigration is 100% balancing that out. And the other cool thing that he brought up was birth rates are slowly declining in the United States historically compared to where it was. So if you just did not have that immigration, we would actually slowly be having that declining birth rate. And that's probably not ideal for keeping house values where they are. But because of the immigration, that's 100% bolstering it. So to me, as my daughters say, the low key thing that I think moves the market is that's kind of under the radar. But I think it's really, really important. The next two that we're going to talk about, I think you'll probably listen and say, okay, those are spot on, but I want to try to shine maybe some light a little differently on how we view these two key indicators that I think are 100% moving. So the number two driver, and I wouldn't say number one is immigration, but just number two on our list is supply and demand. That is still always in my heart, I think, the key metric of what moves the market and really how we see it on a day-to-day basis. It's obviously affecting affordability. Affordability will 100% continue to be an issue across the country, and in high value markets like Denver, it's an even bigger issue than parts of like the Southeast, parts of the Midwest. Wage growth, again, is going to continue to be modest. And kind of pulling on that thread of what we just talked about in the prior point, if we've got immigration and people are willing to work for less because it's a significant improvement to the life of where they came from, if we think about automation, and if we think about AI and the overseas workforce, the labor market and the wage growth is not going to be astronomical. It's not going to be through the roof, but the prices for housing keeps rising significantly. So that's kind of that teeter-totter that gets totally thrown out of whack. So we're going to take a quick break and tell you about the next Elevation Academy. If you're looking to dive deep into real estate investing, this is definitely the event for you. Our academy features over a 100-step process to help you navigate every single thing from market analysis all the way down to every aspect of project management. So this is tailored for both beginners and seasoned investors. And our one-day intensive training will equip you with the strategies and insights needed to elevate your real estate investing game. Spots are definitely limited, so click on the link below in the show notes to sign up and transform your approach to real estate investment. Okay, let's get back to the episode. Here's kind of another kind of real day anecdote. So our sales assistant that we have from a virtual perspective, she lives and works in the Philippines. We have her at $10 an hour. And one of the things that was really important to me is like, okay, is that a livable wage over there? What I'm told is that's super, super fair and super livable wage. She's a really bright woman and we're proud to have her on our team. She busts her ass and her shift for us is 3 a.m. to 8 a.m. time in the Philippines. That's 1 to 5 for Denver. So I've got people like that I can't even find a high school intern to do the same amount of work. And she's a college graduate and she's got 5 years of experience working for another investor in Dallas. Like that's what we're talking about, people. That's what we're competing against. So if you're not doing that, I think you're being left in the dust. But again, that I think has an effect on wage growth and seeing where supply and demand goes from. I think there's still a huge generational wealth transfer that's happening and will continue to happen between the generations over the next 20 years. And if we balance that with limited supply and we've got the boomer generation and older that is using smart estate planning strategies and essentially buying their kids' homes or putting down payments down or going in on investment properties with their adult children, that's going to affect supply and demand. And we're seeing it. Like I said, think about an episode that we had with our Sloan's Lake property. There were 5 buyers. It was all wealthy family, and they were either buying it for their kid or the one we ended up selling it for was the kid paid for it, and then mom and dad are paying them back when they sell their property. That's throwing supply and demand out of whack, in my opinion. So what I would look at is, again, go to Ken McElroy's video because he really has this awesome slide that I would love to have. If he's want to share it, I'd love to share it with you guys. But it's roughly at minute 29 in his podcast and his YouTube video. It is talking about the cycles of real estate, and there's 4 different phases. So I'm going to go over these really quick because, again, I think it really helps paint the picture of why supply and demand really helps move the markets. So the first phase is called the recovery. So if you're thinking of just the classic slow rolling bell curve that is coming, on the upside, and there's little new construction and vacancy is finally starting to decline as you're kind of coming out of the rough part of where you might have just come from an economic standpoint. Phase 2 is called the expansion. And that's where supply and demand are getting close to hitting an equilibrium of hitting that top of the peak. The way that he outlines it is that we're somewhere in between the middle point of the curve and not really getting to the top from a single housing family perspective. And I agree with them spot on. I think that is 100% realistic. He thinks that, again, the single family housing is somewhere between phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 3 is called hypersupply. And that is where tons of new construction has kicked in. There is slowly starting to be increase in vacancy because, again, think supply and demand from your Econ 101 class. When there's tons of supply, the demand is typically not as high. People have options. And so this is where he brings up that with the multifamily space, I see that data. Just drive around Metro Denver and look at how many cranes there are in the sky. Look at how many beautiful fancy apartment buildings are getting built. I think we'll absorb those rates. It's called absorption rate, which means when people finally move in and the vacancy goes down. But right now you're seeing vacancies increase. You're seeing rents either stabilize or go down slightly because there's just lots more options for people to rent their apartments. So that's the hyper supply where it's slowly starting to come down. And then you bottom out in a recession. The last true recession that we've had is the housing crash of 2008, 9, and 10. I think you could definitely argue that there was a mini recession when it came to COVID, but from a housing price perspective, I remember it clear as day where we were in one project and we had just started working with a contractor that we've done since a ton of business with. And we both stood in this house and we're like, are we going to get destroyed or are things going to go better? And actually the city shut down and we had permits pulled on a property and they stopped checking. So I was like, well, just finish it, do it to code and do permit quality work, but let's sell it. Thank God we kept going because there was only 2 or 3 months of uncertainty. And obviously we crushed it for the next 2 years after that. But that's where the completions have already happened with the recession phase. And there's a lot more vacancy. That, which I agree with him on this one, is that's where the office space is right now. It is interesting. Again, we'll do another episode on this, but that's exactly why we bought an office building. I think people think we're insane. And this is where I look back to a way smarter investor, Warren Buffett, and he said, buy when there's blood in the streets. So we were buying rental properties during the housing crash. I wish I could have bought more. We just acquired a beautiful office building. I'm trying to buy more during what I think is the recession. I think things will come back. Again, it will never be 5 days a week, corporate work environment. But if you can buy right, I think that's where you need to buy in the cycle. So I wanted to help frame supply and demand, but give you a couple different things to think about and some data points to consider. Let's move on to the third key factor. And I'm going to combine them together because I think they do go hand in hand. And that is interest rates and inflation. We kind of teased this in the intro, but if we think about interest rates and inflation, I 100% think you have to harken back to the 1980s. I think there's a lot of parallels, and it's all about the interest rates in 1980s, the household income as well. Those are 2 key factors we're going to talk a lot about. So if you want to kind of do a little homework, look up data when it relates to household income and interest rates. I combined a bunch of different data for this. So check the show notes, but there's a great article in Market Watch. There's Ken's podcast talks about this as well. Tried to look at CNBC and Bloomberg. So a bunch of kind of Wall Street type of pieces of information. But it talked about in the 1980s, in the early 1980s, household income, the amount you'd have to spend to buy a property is roughly 24% of your income. Right now, our current household income and how much of your money do you have to spend to buy the same property is between 35 and 40% nationwide. So again, that's up significantly. And people always say like, well, yeah, in the 80s, people bought houses and it was 17% interest. Well, you're paying 17% interest of a much, much less expensive asset. So your payments are not only lower. I mean, I get it, simple math, but the percentage of your income was far less than we're having to pay right now. So I think that's a huge thing of what is keeping the market from exploding again in a positive direction from a pricing perspective is that's super out of whack. There's a big difference between the 80s and between right now. So if we're looking at high rates and inflation, that has actually never caused a price decrease. Look at that again. High rates and inflation, prices have never come down historically. And again, not to say that history always repeats itself or it's always perfectly correlated. We'll talk about that here in a second. But again, I think that there has to be similarities. And the chief economist, Mark Fleming of First American, had a great quote. And he said, history doesn't always repeat itself, but it often rhymes. So to me, I think that's pretty spot on. It's really also, yes, we are also coming out of unprecedented times. We've never had a pandemic worldwide health shutdown, which caused this crazy, super drastic mini recession and then a crazy V-shaped recovery. So again, we don't know all the pieces of the puzzle. We won't know that until we look back probably 15 years from now. I think the thing we have to be careful of is we have never pumped that much money in subsidies into our economy to try to juice it and give people so much spending power. And we had this huge swing of personal savings rates were at the all-time high ever. Makes sense. We're all stuck in our homes and you can't spend money and the government's giving you money. Now, fast forward to interest rates are significantly higher. Wages have not grown and people are dipping into their savings or they're spending on their credit card. And so savings rates are now at almost all-time lows. So when we see these things happen in a hyper-compressed fashion, I do think we have to be careful, but I still think you can kind of make some comparisons from the 80s to what's going on right now. So to put some specific context, and let's look at actually 2 very specific times. So I'm going to look at 1984, and then I'm going to look at right now, 2024. In 1984, the median home price was roughly 3 times what the household income was. So that's a little off from the other piece of data that we had. That was 24%. So we're somewhere between 3 and 4 times of what you're making in a year. That's how much the house costs. That's nationwide again in 2024. The median home price is at least 5x of what household income is right now. That's nationwide. I then kind of did some math, and if median home prices in Denver are, for May, it looks like they're at $615,000 median home price for Denver, then the median household income is 79 grand, which again, that seemed low. I checked that in a couple different spots. That seemed low, but let's just use that math. In Denver, we're at 8 times your household income for the purchase price of a property. That's insane. I don't know if that's sustainable. So that's obviously the big challenge, but that's still moving the markets. Even if you looked at the average household income in Denver. So again, that's everybody. Think of big average. The data that I found is that the average household income is $111,000. That seems a little more realistic to me. I think whether you've got one earner in the low six figures or if you have two people making between 50 and 60 grand a year, that just seemed more kind of realistic to me. But that's still 6 times the household income. So these are 3 things that I think are really moving the market. And I think that you have to pay attention to these things. So as we wind down today's episode, I really want you to look at national data, but don't get analysis paralysis. Look at economic data from jobs, look at unemployment, look at interest rates. Again, I'm not here to preach from a political perspective, but geopolitical issues, when we've got wars in Ukraine, we've got wars in Gaza, those aren't good things going on. Those don't usually help things. So there's a lot of uncertainty going on right now. So look at that. But then you have to drill down to your local market and even your local submarket. If you think about it, neighborhoods in Denver perform significantly differently depending upon where we're at in the housing cycle. So really, really look at supply and demand, look at unemployment, look at the housing laws. I think that's another thing on a localized basis that really moves the market if you kind of layer that under our 3 big pillars that we just talked about. Look at Megan Aller's data on a weekly basis. Look at the Denver Metro Association of Realtors. Sorry, it's like a mouthful. And then there's tons of other traditional economic data that you can find on a monthly basis, just researching online. So really look at that and drill down. And again, tell me what you guys are seeing out there. I would love to hear from other investors. I'd love to hear from other real estate agents, even people in finance and insurance. I'm really interested in wealth management. What are you guys and what are you women seeing out there? I think that's really important. So please engage with us. Obviously, like and subscribe. I'm super excited for these next couple episodes, and we will catch you guys on the flip side. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Raising the Flipping Bar. If you found value in our insights and stories, let's keep the conversation going. Connect with me on social media and be sure to share this episode with friends or colleagues who might benefit. Your feedback and reviews help us grow and reach more listeners like you. So please, if you enjoyed this episode, leave us a review. Thanks again to the Elevation Academy for sponsoring today's show. If you're interested in learning more, click the link in the show notes below. And remember, every property tells a story, every deal brings a lesson. Keep reaching for those goals, and we'll catch you on the flip side. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for listening and watching Raising the Flipping Bar. Just a basic overall disclaimer is that A, this is not legal advice. B, this is not tax advice. C, this is not financial advice. I hope you get the gist, but I'm obviously not a lawyer, not a CPA. Hell, I'm not even a real estate agent, actually. But in general, we hope you get a ton of value out of this, but there is a bit of a disclaimer. Please consult a professional if you have any questions whatsoever. Thanks for tuning in.